Got about just under 20% leak down. However, and now there is a giant hole into the adapter plate. So this whole thing is basically junk. I don't want you to see this before we do anything else. I'm going to start these engines here real quick. I got this one on a flush attachment. Now that it's running, I want you to listen to it. Now if you listen to it, you can hear it's got a little bit of a misfire almost. It's like a little stutter. And in that stutter, after it gets going, if you got it in the water with back pressure, you can hear it. It's got like a pop to it almost. So what that sound is, it's kind of like an exhaust flap, and basically the engine, in my opinion, has a head gasket issue, and so we're going to do a leak down on it to figure out where that is and why it's probably getting water in one of the cylinders, or the head gasket between two cylinders has a little hole or something in it, so the compression or the exhaust or just any of the components of a 4-stroke, any one of those strokes, when it's going up and down or whatever, between maybe 6 and 5, if there's a hole there, then it's pushing into the other cylinder. And so now what we're going to do is pull the power head off, we're going to do a leak down first. So once we do the leak down, that's going to tell us which hole is going on where, and then we're going to pull the power head off, pull the head off, and check that head gasket and change it if that be our problem. With the leak down, what we're going to do is pull all these ignition coils, then we're going to pull all of the spark plugs, and once we got the spark plugs out, we're going to take our leak down tester and we are going to do the leak down for each one of these cylinders. You're going to want to gather all your tools. Obviously you need a cylinder leak down tester, then an 8mm on a ratchet. The first thing we're going to do is take off these ignition coils and get the spark plugs out. After removing the ignition coils and the spark plugs, you want to take out the dipstick and the oil fill cap too, in order to open up more avenues to hear where air could be leaking from. So if you hear the air coming out of the oil fill or dipstick, then it's getting past the piston rings and escaping from the crankcase. And if you hear air coming from over here on the intake side around the manifold, you know that your intake valves are leaking. If you hear it over here on the exhaust side of the engine, then you know your exhaust valves are leaking. And if you hear it between two cylinders, air going in here and coming out here, then you know you blew a head gasket between those cylinders. So we're gonna find top dead center on our pistons by manually turning over the flywheel. You're gonna want to get a pretty decently sized Phillips head. Take your Phillips head, put it into the cylinder so the piston will push out the screwdriver while you're manually turning it over. On top dead center on the cylinder you want to test by using your screwdriver, you're going to want to hook up a little hose attachment, get your leak down tester, hook up the air compressor to it, and then zero it out by opening up the valve all the way to the 0 at set. Anyway, as you can see, it is on 0 and 100. The gauge is zeroed out. We're ready to hook up and introduce some air to the cylinder. All right, so right now we've got it on top dead center compression on number 2, and you can see we've got about a 13% leak down on our gauge here. And so if you go up here, so you can hear the difference when I cover it up. Now what that means is that the air is going into our cylinder. Now because the piston's all the way at the top, we're on compression stroke, all the valves should be shut, And so since it's going into the crankcase and getting out the cap here, that means that the air is going past the piston rings into the crankcase and out the oil fill, or out the dipstick too. That's another way you could check it. Like when you're doing number 6 down at the bottom, that's closer to the dipstick, so sometimes you'll hear it out of that. That's why you take those two things out. Now, if we were on the exhaust stroke, or if we have a problem with our exhaust valves, then you're going to hear it on the exhaust or down at the prop. That's where you're going to hear all of your air coming out of. Now, if you hear all the air over here on the intake, that means that the intake valves are messed up and your air is leaking out through the intake valves. On this case here, let's go down to these cylinders. Our top two's all right. This has about a 13% leak down, which is probably just some carbon, maybe a little bit of dirt. It's not a massive issue. It's still low leak down. There is leak down, but it's low. So let's look for a massive leak.
Here's our number. We've got about just under 20% leak down. However, don't know how well you can hear that, but we've got air escaping from this cylinder into this cylinder, and that indicates a blown head gasket right in there.
All right, so we just jumped from this one to this one. So since number 3 is on the compression, our number 4 is on the exhaust. So what I wanted to show you is how the air comes out the exhaust, but because of how bad the head gasket is and potentially a lot of carbon on the valves of the exhaust side, there could be a problem. We're blowing a lot of air from this one out here, so we're losing a ton of air out of here, and that's giving us a 95% leak down. So now we just need to pull the power head and pull our head and see what's going on.
Go down.
All right, well, we have taken off many power heads on this channel before, from 4.2s to 3.3s to L6s to even V8s. So we just skipped to pulling this off. Now we're going to disassemble this whole thing and move on to figuring out what's going on with that head. All right, so we've got the power head off and we got it brought into the shop here. Donnie's starting to take off the valve cover, and once we get the valve cover off, we need to take this off, the valve cover off, take the charge air cooler, separate that from the head, and then we will also need to take the supercharger off, so that way we can get to the head bolts, which are these bolts here on this end of it. And I'll take all those off to pull the head off of this power head. So that's what we're going to do. Let's take them all off. What you think? El sad donkey. All right, so we've got pretty much all the bolts off. We've got the supercharger off, the air intake, charge air cooler is hanging to the side. All these are loosened up and everything else is loosened up. But I figured I'd tell you guys this before. On these engines here, you always want to put it in time before you do anything else. So we've got it in time. We got the notch here to there. So you got a little arrow there and you got a notch, boom, boom, that's in time. Got your cam gears, that's all in time. This is the chain tensioner right down here. Also something else, if you look at these notches, you can see how they line up, and then you've got this flat wrench. When it's in time, boom, that wrench should fit into those notches right like that. And as long as that fits in there, you're good to go. These engines have been known to jump time, and what you can do is take the valve cover off. Once you get your valve cover off, you can check these cams, put the bar right there to make sure they're all in time, and if it jumps a tooth on the chain, you can just put it back in time by loosening up your chain tensioner and then getting slack in your cam, so you can put everything in time, and whichever one's out, you can just pop that over and put it back into time. So now we're pretty much ready to pull this head off. We've got all this stuff off. This may not look like it's off, but it's off enough to where we can pop this head off, change our gasket, clean everything up, and put it back together. So that's what we're going to do now. We're going to pop the chain off of our cam gears.
Oh, now it's really jumping teeth, isn't it?
Nope. Just got it. There's that one. It's those pops that usually get it to break.
It's bending.
There it is. Okay.
Then on the left.
Not until you go to put it back on.
Huh?
Not until you go to put it back on.
Yeah, this is really burnt freaking well.
All right, so we've got both the cam gears off, got the tensioner loosened up, chain is ready to slide through that way, and all we got to do is now pop these bolts off the front, get those out, and we'll be able to pull this head off of the back of the engine. So as our burro triste is over here sleeping, we are going to go ahead and pop these bolts out and pull this head off. Once we get the head off, then we'll be able to see what in the world's going on with everything. If our valves are bent, carboned up, what in the world's going on. So let's get this head off of here. All right, last two.
Got the chrome head.
Last one. Okay. Come off.
Yep.
It appears to be that the head gasket's not as bad as we were expecting, but the valves, looking at each one of these valves, I mean, look at this. This thing is caked with junk. You can see it's not even closing because of all the buildup on the back side of it. The intakes are all pretty clean, but these, no. The intakes, yeah, the intake's pretty clean. The exhausts are pretty well smoked out. I mean, look at this thing. You can see all of it all the way around there.
He did have a blown head gasket.
But here's our head gasket.
Is this 4 and 5? Yeah.
Yeah, looks like that was cut. Oh yeah, I can see it now. You can see the cut in there.
Yeah. 4 and 5.
Hard to see it, but you can see that's cut and jacked up. So what we need to do is clean these valves off to get this carbon off here. This is going to be a task. I mean, look at these shot. They're shot may. The head surface looks pretty good. We'll take the rubber needler to that. Let's see what the pistons look like. Yeah, not too shabby in between each one of these, but quite a bit of carbon buildup in here. You can see on each one of these pistons, like, look at that. That's a lot of carbon buildup. Yep. So we're gonna try and clean this up. Ooh, even up here, look at all the carbon buildup right here. You can even pull it off in chunks right there. You can see the difference from the carbon right there and right there. That's where the piston stops once it gets to TDC. So we're going to clean all this stuff up, and once we get everything cleaned up, we'll put this thing back together to see if we can't get this to run the way it should. Sad donkey back here.
Don't talk to me. I don't like my job. I don't like you.
He don't like me, he's not happy, but that's all right. Let's see here. You go back to Home Depot?
So I was at the Home Depot. What
we got going on here is we got a problem. all these valves are so carboned up, and we do not. Do you mind? So, because these are so carboned up and we don't have the tool to take them out, for some reason the tool is not where it belongs. Therefore, we've got to figure out a way to clean these without pulling them from the head. What we got to do is we got to figure out a way to clean these. So we've got a couple options. What we've got is we've got one of these little polishers and some polishing pads that we're going to possibly make work. Then we have also got some Dremel tool like this that we're going to put on that, and this might just be enough to where we can slide these in underneath the valve just to clean it. We've also got one of these that might be able to get up in there. What we're going to do is trim this thing down so that way we can get the back side of these underneath the valve. We're going to make this the other one. And what is going on here?
Bonjour.
So pretty much what we're going to do is take this piece and I'm going to shave all this down. I'm going to probably do that on the grinder out here, and then we'll be able to hopefully get up underneath this with those pads. We're not honing out the cylinder walls, we're not cleaning the pistons, we're not going to worry about any of this carbon. We're just worried about sealing these, getting the head gasket cleaned up, and putting this thing back together, so that way it's going to buy another few years of use out of the engine. This is just a Saturday project anyway, so I need to get it done today, and unfortunately we don't have the tool to do it, pull these valves out, so this is the way we're going to do it.
Yeah, me gusta, güey.
It's going to work, man.
It's not going to work.
It's going to work, man. They'll never know.
They're literally watching.
They're not going to know. Flip her up this way. This is the one I got to turn, right?
Yeah. Yep. Hold on, go back a little bit. Where's it going down? There you go, right there.
Well, we've got our head coming along here. This is now holding. What we did actually worked. This is holding power tune, so we're just trying to clean this up a little bit more. Our top 4 cylinders are good. These we've got to do next to make sure they hold power tune, but those 4 are holding. That's good. Donnie's over here cleaning up our mating surface that's on the block, and while he's doing that, I am actually going to go over here and work on the other portion of this project, which is the thermostat dump hose and the adapter that goes down into the adapter plate, which is this thing right here. And this thing is trashed, so we might have to replace this hose. We're gonna have to replace that outrigger clamp, but there is a fitting there that is metal that we're going to have to replace and get this fixed before we put the power head down. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to knock this thing off, pull that out of there, so then we can replace our base gasket, our head gasket, put everything back together. And once we have everything back together, then we will put the power head back down on the engine, and hopefully then we can call it a day. Oh no.
this even be considered a motor?
So this right here is the part where the thermostat dumps its water. It goes through a hose, then comes into this fitting, and then goes out the exhaust. But this has been long enough to where it started leaking, and then the salt started eating all the way around this whole piece, and now there is a giant hole into the adapter plate. So this whole thing is basically junk. We're not going to change this out today, because instead we're going to use the power of
JB Weld.
Yeah, the magical JB Weld. But I'm going to go and show you what one of these looks like, or what it's supposed to look like. So right now you can see there is a bolt right here, but all that's eaten away, all that's eaten away, and then all this is pretty much gone with a hole there. So let's go see what this is supposed to look like. Here we have the same thing, only this one is not rotted out. And you can see there's your bolt, there's your fitting, and look, this is supposed to be all metal. So nothing is supposed to be gone there. Compared to what we saw on the other one, you can tell how bad that one is and how much it's rotted out. All right, well, we've got our hole cleaned up pretty well. It doesn't look like it, but it is decently clean. The salt has worked its way into the pores of the aluminum, so there's not much else we can do. We're just going to load this thing up with some JB Weld Quick, and we're just going to paint it up like we were Picasso, fill that hole in, and we're going to let it ride as long as possible. So here's what we're going to do: mix it up, put it in there, and let it dry. Well, it's not the prettiest Picasso that I've ever done, but it's looking like it's gonna hold and keep water from leaking out anymore. Again, this thing, there's no saving it. We're not pulling it off and welding it. It's too old, it's not worth it. We're just gonna patch it like that and send her out the door, bud. All right, here we are with our cylinders. These, we've laid power tune all in them, and they all held the power tune. We've opened them back up, kind of scrubbed them down a little bit with a bronze copper brush just to clean them off, one of these. And so now we're going to do these two right here, make sure that these valves are holding, and as long as they're holding, they'll hold the power tune, then boom, we're going to be golden. We'll be able to stick this thing back on the engine. We've got the adapter plate all JB welded up, so our thermostat hose, dump hose, will be sealed up. And now we should be, once we get the head done, we'll put it back on the power head on the block, stick the power head back on the engine, and then we'll be able to start this biscuit up and splash her, huh? What you think?
It's my water.
All right, so we've got our valves all cleaned up pretty well. These are looking a lot better than they were. Again, we had to do this without taking these valves out of the head. So we got them all cleaned up. They're all sealing the way they should. We've also got our power head all cleaned up over here on the block. All the piston heads cleaned off, and all the surface is cleaned off. So, well, it is clean. I just wiped it. We're gonna wipe it all down before we put them together. But since this is all clean and the head's all clean, I think we're ready to stick it back together. What do you think, Donnie? Here is our new head gasket. That's all nice and clean. Here's the old one that's, again, broken here in between these two cylinders. This is a piece all chipped up. So now let's put this one on, new bolts, and we're gonna put our head on. All right, Donnie, we've got the valves in time. Those are all set. And then now we've also got our pistons in time. So we're on top dead center here, as well as our head So now we're going to take our head and bring it over here and stick it on the engine. So now we need to torque all these head bolts right here, and it's nice because we got the torque specs right here on the block. The first one is 20 foot-pounds, the second one is 40 foot-pounds, and then the third turn is 270 degrees. So we're going to do 1, 2 all the way around, and then we'll turn it 270 degrees, which is basically 3/4 of a turn. Now these are all labeled, so we're going to go inside out. You got number 1 right here, then you got number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, number 6, number 7, number 8, number 9, number 10, number 11, number 12, number 13, number 14. So that's going to be our order, and now we're just going to go all the way around it. Okay, we're going to start back at the beginning to do our second pass. Okay, now we are on our third pass, which means we've got to do 270 degrees, which is basically 3/4 of a turn. Half. Quarter. Okay, now that we've got everything torqued up, we can go ahead and put our supercharger, our intake, all this stuff back on. Double check that it's in time. So right here, we're definitely in time right there. We got our arrow, we got our notch, that's in time. We've got our bar right here in between our valves. So our valves are on time. So now we're gonna have to come down here and we're gonna stick our 2 cam gears back on, get our chain put back into place, get the chain tensioner put back in. We've got our crankshaft on time, and now that the crankshaft's on time, we got our chain. Now look, if you look down here, we've got this gear is on, but this one won't align. So whenever you get to this point, all you got to do is come back up here. You're going to take this wrench out of here. You use this side to kind of give you a little bit of slack in the chain, and then you can come back on this side, and we're going to turn this one just a smidgen. Bam. Okay, now that that's in there, we can stick this bolt in here, and we can come back up here and turn this back to be in time. Boom. So now we are in time here. We're in time on our crank. This is unlined, and this is right on our mark right there. So we are good to go. Pandemic. All right, we got the power head back onto the engine here on the midsection. We got it started up. The other camera died a minute ago when we started it, so hopefully we got all the footage of all the smoke, which is just the power tune burning out as we started the engine. But everything ran, shifted fine, and so now what we're going to do, we look for no leaks. There's no leaks. Looks like our JB Weld held back here behind this. So now we're going to take this, put it in the water, and then take it for a run and see how she performs. I think that the valves are seating properly now, so we should be good, and bought another few years out of this engine. Power tune. All right, so after getting the boat in the water and testing everything out, it seems to be running well. It's a little dirty right now, and this thing is leaking, so I got that sticking out just so that way it's not pouring water in the cowling. But other than that, everything is working properly. The little carbon clean that we did work. Also, the JB Weld that we put on the adapter plate, that also worked. And if we check everything out here, we've got our idle steady. We've got 143 degrees on our temp. We got 215 degrees on the oil temp. Right now it's at 30 psi on the oil, but that's just because we came off plane. And with these engines here, whenever you, or most Mercuries, even the V6 V8s, whenever you come off a plane, they'll go from like 70 psi all the way down to the 20s or low 30s. Then once the oil thickens up again, it'll go back up into the 40s. So our oil pressure is right. And what else do we got? Our RPM's right. And that's everything. Everything is pretty much smooth as can be. So now we just need to keep running the boat a little bit to burn any other carbon that's left in the piston, on the piston rings, or any of that stuff that we didn't get since we didn't pull the pistons out of the block. There might be a little bit of carbon left there. Here we are back at the dock. Everything's trimmed up, no problems. Had a really good test run. Boat's running smooth. Got 6300 wide open throttle, no issues. And with a little bit of power tune and some JB Weld, this engine is going to live to see a few more years.